Okay, I think we'll get started. Again, welcome to this week's office hours for ESG and ESGCV. My name is LaQuantia Goodman, and I am today's moderator. If you are just joining us, please go to the chat and introduce yourself with your name and the region you represent. As a reminder, this office hours session is being recorded for the public record. Office hours recordings are on the California ESGCV past trainings webpage. A copy of the slide deck and recording will also be emailed to you. Next slide. How to ask a question. All questions must be submitted in the chat box. Please type your organization and question into the chat box. The team will read questions out loud at the end of the presentation and will provide answers, if possible, throughout the presentation. All questions and answers entered in the chat box will be recorded as part of the public record. Alongside our presenters, we also have several HCD staff, including ESG representatives, ESG-CV grant administrators, and other consultants who are able to answer questions during the question and answer session. Next slide. Today's office hours session agenda includes the following: ESG resources and ESG-CV updates, office hours updates, upcoming trainings, ESG and ESG-CV question and answer, and today's spotlight session, rental assistance agreements. Next slide. ESG upcoming events. Coming soon, so please stay tuned. The 2022 ESG award announcements will be posted early this month. Contracts are anticipated to be executed by July 2023. 2023 ESG annual NOFA is to be released in May this month as well, and webinars will be scheduled within 2 weeks of the NOFA release. Next slide. Now we'll turn it over to Connie.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I wanted to visit with you this morning about fair market rent and waiving this and what HCD would like to do as far as requesting a waiver to HUD. So HCD recognizes how difficult it is finding housing for our most vulnerable ESG clients because of the FMR restriction in the federal regulations. But we have learned through ESG-CV that by lifting the FMR restriction, this has allowed ESG grantees to house those experiencing homelessness much quicker using just rent reasonableness, not the FMR, to determine the appropriate rent for their area. So to keep this going, this momentum going, HCD is considering submitting a request to HUD, asking they allow our state to waive the FMR restriction, but continue requiring the rent reasonableness, the comparison rents, to determine the most appropriate rent for each CSC area. So I would like to ask you if any of you have already or are in the process of submitting a similar request to HUD. We'd like to visit with you and want you to know that we support this request. We'd like to incorporate your request into our request. We'd like to make this request to waive the FMR for the entire state. So if you have done this or you're in the process of doing this, we'd like to meet with you to discuss your proposal, your process, outcome, and if you have received an approval, your implementation of this. If you don't yet have an approval, HCD supports these waivers of FMR, including state and entitlement funding. So again, we're looking for, I would love to visit with you if you have done this in your jurisdiction, if you have made that request to HUD to waive FMR. If you would be willing to visit with us, I'll drop my email address in the chat, but would you reach out to me and we can set a Teams meeting up and visit about it. So thank you very much. And I will turn it back over to LaQuantia.
Thank you, Connie. Next slide.
There's a question in the chat.
The question is from Eva. We were told on another call that it was waived and we could use rent reasonableness.
I can take that. It is waived only for ESGCV. So it is waived for ESGCV funds until the end of the ESGCV grant, but it is not any longer waived for annual ESG funds.
Thank you, Heather. The slide before you has the ESG policy documents, which will be included in the slide deck, so please access those as needed. Next slide. And here are your ESG team representatives: Diana Prado, Giovanni Martinez, Tuesday Cool, and Anthony Zapata. Please reach out to your ESG representative listed above or contact us at esgnofa@hcd.ca.gov. Next slide. Now for the ESGCV updates. Reminders for performance milestones. All program funds for projects, street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, and homelessness prevention, all must be expended by September 30th, 2023. All funds for HMIS and administrative costs shall be expended by October 31st, 2023. And all final RFFs must be submitted to the department no later than November 15th, 2023. Next slide. Reminders while planning for ESGCV closeout. Spend down timing. Know when you're approaching the end. Know that most funds are due to be spent by September 30th, 2023. So don't spend too fast, but time it just right. Funding continuity. Consider HAP funding and other funding streams that will allow you to continue to serve clients after closeout. Closing intake. Set dates and deadlines to stop accepting clients in client intake and prepare for final rapid rehousing assistance. Staffing issues. Just like we need to make sure we are not leaving participants with nowhere to go, we also need to make sure we're thinking of ways to keep our staff employed. Client issues. Make sure you involve and inform participants timely before assistance ends so they can prepare as well. No client should become homeless because a program is closing. Next slide. HCD office hours updates. On May 10th, we'll discuss rent reasonableness and fair market rent, rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention. May 17th, racial equity toolkit. May 24th, eligibility documentation for rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention. And May 31st, income evaluation for rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention. Please use the links below to access the training site, to register for the office hour series, or to view past trainings. Next slide. Upcoming trainings. May 10th, data-driven decision-making. This session will explore use of data in everything from program design to racial equity. Next slide. On June 6th, Rent Reasonableness Policy Clinic, a new and non-traditional provider series. This session will review HUD's rules for rent reasonableness, learn about how to show rent reasonableness in California's high-priced housing market, and work together on the documentation required to complete a unit file. June 8th, HMIS data quality program management, session 1 of the community workshop. This session will focus on the data quality aspects of completeness and accuracy. How much of the required data do you have in HMIS, and how much is that data you have a reflection of any given person's reality? Next slide. June 22nd, HMIS Data Quality Program Management Session 2. This session will review HUD's rules for rent reasonableness, learn about how to show rent reasonableness in California's higher priced housing market, and work together on the documentation required to complete the file. Next slide. And do we have any questions at the moment? Not seeing any in the chat. Next slide. If you have any further questions, please contact us, contact your annual ESG rep, or reach out to ESG at esgnofa@hcd.ca.gov, or reach out to your ESG CV grant administrator. Next slide. Now I'll turn it over to Chris Andrews to provide our spotlight series on rental assistance agreements.
Great, thank you. And good morning, everybody. We're here today to just do a quick walkthrough of rental assistance agreements. If we go ahead to the next slide. What we really want to make sure we're talking through today is what are the requirements of a rental assistance agreement, especially as you are and are continuing to make sure that your program documentation is correct and complete, and your program files and your client files are fully documented. So what is a rental assistance agreement? It is the agreement between the landlord or the property owner or whoever is the responsible entity for the unit and the recipient or the subrecipient, the service provider, to be providing ESG or ESG CV rental assistance. So what is that really? In simpler language and plainer language, it's the agreement between the service provider and the landlord, authorizing that provider to pay rent on behalf of the client, on behalf of the program participant. It is the documentation that that service provider is holding to say that they are connected to this property. What isn't it? It is not the lease agreement. The lease agreement is a separate document, and that is the agreement between the client, the tenant, and the landlord or the property manager. Both are required. We've talked about them kind of over the past couple of weeks of what is a rental assistance agreement, what is a lease agreement, and wanted to take just a little bit more time to dive into the components of a rental assistance agreement today. But it's important to keep in mind that both the lease agreement and the rental assistance agreement are required when rental assistance is being provided. And that is true for ESG CV or ESG. Anytime that rental assistance is being provided, there needs to be both a rental assistance agreement and a lease agreement. Next slide. So pulling from the regs, the requirements for the rental assistance agreement, number one, is a requirement where the service provider is receiving the same notice that the program participant is of any notice to vacate or any complaint. Ensuring that there are terms, that the same payment due date, the same grace period, the same late payment period are all being applied to the service provider in the same way that they're being provided to the client or to the tenant. The tenant can't have one set of requirements and the service provider having a separate. The landlord, to participate in the program, needs to be providing those same requirements to both the provider and to the landlord. And then for any time that we're looking at project-based rental assistance, that initial term of rental assistance is for a year. For tenant-based rental assistance, That agreement, is oftentimes just the period that assistance will be provided for or is anticipated of being provided for, and being extended or being limited if that period shifts or fluctuates. Next slide. So let's kind of call out what those items are, right? So landlord has to say, that the landlord is going to give you, the provider, copy of any notice to vacate, any eviction, any complaint that is being filed against the tenant. Number two, that all the same payment terms are being applied in the tenant's lease as they are to the service provider. And then number three, most of the projects that we're looking at are TBRA, so I'm going to focus in on that. But for TBRA, that rental assistance agreement needs to have the time period tied to the period of time that assistance is being provided to the program participant. So that rental assistance agreement needs to be in effect for that full period.
Welcome to Zoom.
Of assistance.
Enter your meeting ID followed.
Okay, and then some recommendations. These are, type of being able to document, call out what is the type of rental assistance being provided. For late payments, if a late payment is mandated, required, at fault of the service provider or the recipient or subrecipient, you, the service provider, are responsible to pay those penalties, and you cannot use ESG funds to be paying those late payment penalties. Number three, if your program participant is paying a share or a portion of the rent within your policies and procedures for your rapid rehousing or for your homeless prevention program, you need to document how you are determining what that share amount is. And the rental assistance agreement needs to define what the responsibilities are for the client, or for the tenant, and for the service provider. And then number four, if you're looking at if you're using TBRA, your rental assistance agreement, it ends and your program doesn't pay anymore if your client or tenant moves out, if the lease between the client and the tenant ends, or if your client is no longer eligible for ESG or ESG-CV funded rental assistance. So these can be very simple agreements. They don't need to be a long document, but you need to make sure that you are including all of these provisions, and always recommend when working with a new landlord, including this as part of your sit down with that landlord to explain, what is going into the rental assistance agreement and why that's going into the rental assistance agreement. And with that, any questions? I'm seeing one question, if there's a template for an agreement. Erin, I don't believe HCD has a standard template. Is that correct?
Chris, you are correct. HCD does not have a standard template. In the past, when people have asked me for one, you can actually Google it, and there's a lot of organizations that have posted theirs online. I recommend trying to keep them simple. I've seen some that are like 6 pages long and others that are just a couple. But if you do, need a specific example, you could reach out to your grant administrator and they'd be able to dig one up for you.
And if you are going to borrow a template, double check that it has all of the required terms, all of the required conditions. And that you're not being left in a, in a bind where you borrowed something from somebody and they didn't have a complete document.
You have a question from
Yep.
April. You see that one, Chris? Okay.
Sure. So questions just regarding the VAWA lease addendum and updating the template to remove the further reference to the VAWA agreement. I assume this, April, you might be referring to if it's a TBRA, that the VAWA component doesn't become a requirement once that assistance is ended, and that is a component of the lease agreement, correct? Any other questions?
If so, please come off mute and ask your question, or drop it in the chat if you haven't done already. Another one from April.
Yeah, April, not seeing your rental assistance agreement in your packet, it's hard to comment kind of in the abstract. I think if you have a question of what are the specifics, and if you're asking if something can be removed or lifted, I'd recommend reaching out to your grant administrator, just so we're not talking here without being able to look at everything and fully reflect on all of the documentation. Rachel, this is applicable to ESG and ESG CV rental assistance agreements. Were not waived or altered as part of the ESG CV program. So all of these requirements carry through both. So if you are building templates for a rapid rehousing or other rental assistance program under ESG CV, it would be applicable under your ESG program as well. And another question required, even if only assistance is for a couple of months. Yes, the rental assistance agreement is required for any short or medium term assistance. So anytime those payments are being made, a rental assistance agreement needs to be in place. When the assistance ends, the rental assistance agreement often also ends. So it's written to be termed to coincide with your ESG or ESG CV assistance.
And Chris, to be clear for our audience, this is still part of our office hours series where we're talking about things that we received as findings from HUD during our monitoring, which means if we got it, if they select you, they're going to ask for the same stuff. So we're trying to make sure that you hear that we want the rental assistance agreement. We need all these different components. It also goes nicely with the client file checklists that we did, I want to say 3 weeks ago, but I honestly can't remember. We also should have those posted soon. I'm going to be handing those to HCD hopefully today, so you can begin using those as well. So things are this, and most of the next few sessions are about us educating you about what we got findings on from HUD monitoring, so you can avoid the same things. So just wanted to make sure that was clear.
And did we answer the back end of that question? What happens when the assistance ends?
We did. So assuming it's a TBRA program, your rental assistance agreement would also be ending. If it's a project-based assistance, you have a minimum term of 1 year of that rental assistance agreement.
Ben, I will answer your question verbally, but LaQuantia already has in written format. But yes, we are finalizing a client file checklist. They are on my desk, giving them one more pass over with fresh eyes. We are going to do 2 different things with those client file checklists. One, we're going to post them to the website. That's going to take a couple days or maybe a week. We're also going to ask the ESGCV grant administrators and the ESG annual reps to send it out to everybody as soon as we have them. There are 8, 4 for ESG, homeless prevention, rapid housing, street outreach and emergency shelter, and the same 4 for ESGCV. So those should be, if everything works out well, in your inbox today or tomorrow from your grant administrator or your rep, and post on the website hopefully about a week from today.
So then Ben followed up asking what's on the ESG website currently is not the latest version, correct?
That's right, Ben. So what's on the website right now is actually all 4 components in one giant checklist, which we needed to do so that we could hand it to the HUD monitors to clear a finding. But we understand that operationalizing the use of that across a component, like you don't need all the rapid housing stuff if you're doing shelter. You don't need all the homeless prevention stuff if you're doing street outreach. So that big one, there's not a ton of variation between that and the 8 versions, other than we cut them into just component specific pieces. As we assume that your clients are being served in a component, shelter, then they're served in another component, street outreach, or another component, homeless prevention, rapid housing. So these are shorter because that one's like, I don't know, 12, 15 pages. This is, these are anywhere from 4 to 7 pages tops that just speak to that component.
Thanks, Chris. Then from Molly, please correct me if I'm wrong. The VAWA addendum is to be signed and placed in each client file unless the addendum was already part of the lease signed upon the client's move-in.
Sure. So, I will clarify, and this might be something we want to just clarify in writing, kind of these specific requirements, because this is important in both your rental assistance agreement and in the lease. There are VAWA requirements, and the VAWA terms need to be included in that rental assistance agreement with the landlord. So the landlord is understanding, what are the VAWA requirements that they're operating under, kind of in participating or in being partners with the service provider for this rental assistance program. And then those VAWA requirements are also included in the lease, so that is documented, in a formal agreement between the client being served and with the landlord, right? So you're wanting that documented in both of those kind of contractual relationships between the provider and the landlord, and then between the tenant and the landlord. And I think, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, I know, we've had a few VAWA sessions that really went deep on this and really walked through all the addendums. And I think that might be helpful for us to send around, or for us to post to.
You are correct. We have done several. They're also, the VAWA policy and the VAWA lease addendum are on the HCD website. We've done an office hour. We've done a community workshop on it before today. Previous months, I can't remember exactly when, but that was also part of HUD monitoring. If you hear nothing from me via the HUD monitoring that we received and what I'm hearing from other communities nationally, documentation, which is all we're talking about. Rental assistance agreements, leases, VAWA addendums, all these things, that's what HUD is really, really focused on. So you should be really focused on it.
All right, any more questions? Anyone want to unmute themselves and come off and ask? We have plenty of time, but don't want to waste your time either.
Hi, I have a question.
Okay.
So just to refer back to the VAWA, I think what Holly is asking about is between the provider, the agency, and to the client. Do they need to have the VAWA at the beginning when they accepted the client so that the client is aware of all of the rights and whatnot, and then have that in their client files?
So I want to make sure I'm following your question. Are you asking if the VAWA documentation, if it is documented in the lease and documented in the rental assistance agreement, does there also need to be an agreement between the provider and the client? Is that the question?
Yes, I think it kind of, so for like the VAWA disclosures that are given out to the clients, right? Does there need to be documentation of that? Because the lease agreements and the rental assistance agreements will come at a later time. You get the client first, and then rental comes after. So does those VAWA disclosures and everything that needs to be documented need to be in the client file that the agencies have?
Correct.
Thank you for clarification.
Yes, so I think maybe someone else has a different interpretation. My interpretation is that you're kind of documenting those disclosures kind of at every stage that they are provided and made available. And again, I think, we can refer back to the HCD policy and the trainings that have been done on that I think walk through that, in a lot more detail. And so, and Holly, so you're asking if it was, yes, everything would need to be revised.
Thank you, Patricia. We definitely try to, bring forth information that we know everyone needs. So thank you for letting us know that these webinars are definitely very helpful for you. From Rachel, is the VAWA only applicable for the term of the RAA or not the lease term?
I would need to go back and double check. This is an area that I am not, a deep expert on. I refer back to the policy that I think we can send around, and I just don't want to inadvertently kind of start delivering a VAWA session. But we can make sure to send that guidance out.
Yeah, Chris, I think what we'll do with the recording of this, when we send it out, we'll send around the VAWA lease addendum, the VAWA policy, and answer any other questions that might be around the VAWA piece. Again, we got findings on this. Should HUD come to your door, if the VAWA lease addendum is in there, you'll get findings on this as well, which is why we're trying to, at this level, try to push it down as much as possible.
I do have another question, if I may.
Yes, you may.
For the rental assistance agreements, how legally binding does it need to be? Can it just be a MOU? A simple sheet that covers all of the things that the interim rule requires? Or are we going into the legalities of who's protected?
The rental assistance agreement is a written executed agreement between the provider and the landlord, or responsible property manager, be that the landlord or owner or a third entity. So that is a binding agreement between the two. I think there are a lot of different ways that you could frame it or call it, but it is a binding agreement that both parties are signing and executing. And to Chris's point, right, there's some retroactive cleanup, but the intent of the agreements is that they are being executed prior to that tenant moving in. That is the intent of the agreement. So they are part of that initial negotiation or agreement with the landlord, where you are establishing what is the provider's relationship to that landlord or entity.
And to answer April's second question, will there be a frequently asked questions roundup of these questions that can be sent to us? I guess for the most part, these questions have been answered and will definitely be in the recording that you will get. And that'll be sent out either today or tomorrow. We try to send them out as quickly as possible, so you will have them. And from Tuesday, if we have clients in housing that do not have rental assistance agreements, what should we do?
Yeah. So at this point, right, those agreements should be executed now, right? You're acknowledging that they were, are being executed after the fact. The term, should be, for the term of assistance. But, if you don't have them, execute them, right? And that's, true of anything in your client file, right? If you find something that's missing, if you don't have that full documentation, complete it.
And then what about clients that have left the program but are still able to be monitored?
Yeah, I feel, sorry, Chris, I feel like this is something that you and I have struggled with is, every client record should be complete. There's clients that are gone, that there's not a lot of utility going back and trying to put that information together. So I think our philosophy has been, specifically through our monitoring, and we're working with 5 communities that were part of HCD's monitoring, because we have to monitor the subs and the subs as part of that. Our guidance to them is going to be, let's fix the records we can, and let's demonstrate that we're keeping fidelity to the client file record, and that we're keeping fidelity to our own policies, and that we won't have to fix everything going back. If we can, we will, but if it's beyond the possibility, there's no reason to go back and find a client who's now in PSH and say, I need all this stuff signed. HUD is actually very reasonable. So what we're going to do with our monitoring is, once the policies are finalized with our 5 subrecipients, we're going to fix client records if we can, or demonstrate that our client record process moving forward is correct, and that will help us clear those monitoring. So hopefully that's clear, and Chris, hopefully that's what you're going to say as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it for myself, right? I've been in communities where I was working, and that situation, right? That happens to all of us everywhere, right? We try to get everything, but we don't. And I think, okay, well, what can I put in the program file? So whoever is coming after me, if I'm not going to be there in 2 years and the program is being monitored, they're not going to be left kind of searching through old paper files and old emails, trying to find it, and just putting a memo into the file or a note into the file, acknowledging, it wasn't there, it was not completed. Policies were updated after the client had left the program, and the rental assistance agreement could not be executed. And just acknowledging that. So you're not leaving a partial file, but I think is leaving a question. You're, owning the answer to that. And, absolutely, this is where, where checklists become important.
From Jocelyn, does it matter the date when they signed the VAWA addendum, and should it be dated the same day as the lease is signed?
So, Jocelyn, I think you're asking if it should be backdated.
I mean, because it's a lease addendum, it should be dated with, it should be just part of your leasing process. We understand, however, that you might not have it already, and you might need to go back and get some. I wouldn't go through the process of backdating that. I would just kind of put it in place. I think our concern about the VAWA lease addendum is that landlords are going to have a problem with it, not that clients are. And I think creating strife with an already housed client is going to be detrimental to you and the client and potentially the landlord. So how you approach that conversation needs to be very nuanced, perhaps, since we haven't been doing something that we should have been doing. Chris, does that feel right to you?
Yeah, I agree. I was headed in the same direction of, not backdating, but, including it in the lease package or including it in your rental assistance agreement package, but that not being backdated. And just, again, to the point of what we were saying before, right? If something's missing, if something's coming in late, it's, it's being added to the file late. And to Chris's point, right? HUD is reasonable, HCD is reasonable. I think we're all on the same team of trying to create and establish more permanent, sustainable housing. And that's the goal. And there may be, areas where something is not, dated on the correct day and it's coming weeks after, a month after, or whatever it may be.
And I think HUD, both the field office and headquarters, are seeing ESGCV as this giant funding source that came down as a chance to make sure that ESG annual long-term is going to be in good shape, and documentation is something that can be handled. So we've done a lot of, policy around documentation. We're talking a lot about it this entire spring and into the summer, even the late winter we were into this. So really what I see as the movement here is standardizing our documentation, eligibility, all that stuff that meets the baseline requirements for what HUD needs. And we just hadn't had enough ESG funding prior to ESGCV to assure that these processes were in place, and sure enough, they weren't. So this is our chance to get it right going forward and keep those processes moving.
Jocelyn, I think on the VAWA addendum, I think they're in the trainings where I talk about landlord engagement strategies, encourage you to look at it there. But I think the more open and upfront kind of in conversations about all of these terms, the VAWA addendum or anything in the rental assistance agreement, it is so important to be open and upfront of what are the requirements and what are the, these are program requirements. What is the purpose of them? Why are they there to ensure that people are safe? The same way that you are explaining to a landlord when you need to go through and do habitability standards and look at lead-based paint, is treating all of these other terms and requirements in the same fashion. They're all geared to the client's safety.
Yeah, and I think, the VAWA lease addendum can be something that's scary at first, but if you really look at it and understand it before you talk to anyone about it, it protects the client, it protects you, And it protects the landlord because you can continue to either fill that or continue to pay if it's vacant and you can't fill it. So there's protections on all three sides. When I first was learning about the VAWA addendum, because I didn't know much about it, I was concerned. But when I looked at the policy that we created and the way it actually operationalized, it actually just protects everybody in case there is, active domestic violence happening, and we need to really worry about folks' safety first. And I think once you can digest it and understand it and explain it to landlords, there'll be some hesitation, because there's always hesitation at having new requirements. But because it protects everybody, I think it shouldn't be the all the landlords shouldn't be saying, I'm not going to sign this thing, I'm not doing this. It'll happen.
Any other questions? Oh, maybe to end on a little bit of a lighter note, Chris, a Kraken wanted to re-up its apartment for another year. Do you know what the landlord said?
I don't.
Release the Kraken. They're available every night at my dinner table at 5 p.m. My kids don't like them either.
That was a pretty good one, Chris.
My kids would have loved it.
Well, there you go for tonight, Amy.
Well, we are not seeing any more questions. Oh, Ben says, is there a Seattle Kraken fan in the house?
I'm not. I actually don't even know what sport that is.
I was thinking hockey, Chris, but I didn't want to jump to that conclusion. But well, thank you, Chris, for your presentation, and thank you everyone for your questions. Hopefully we answered a lot, so hopefully that'll clear a lot up for you guys going forward. But as usual, if you have any more questions, or once you look back over this session or listen to the session and you have more questions, just feel free to reach out to us and we'll do our best to answer those questions for you. Remember that as you exit this session, a question will pop up. So please answer that question so that we can better serve you. We thank you for your attendance and we'll see you next week.